let me go back and tell you what I did right. And because I'm never sure when I talk about what I would have done differently if I help people, but I know if I tell them what I did right, I help them.
Yeah.
And so let me, first of all, what I did right was very simple, Sam. I determined every day to add value to people. Period. End of story. We're done. Every day I'm going to be a plus. When I come along, you, Sam, when I'm done with our interaction, you're going to look at me and say, he just added value to me. Because
Mhm.
and that's simple. And I tell people anybody can do that. So I mean, this is not complicated stuff. In all relationships, we are either a plus or a minus. That's true in marriages. That's true in business. That's true in community. We're either adding value or subtracting value from people every day. It's just that simple.
Mm.
And so I intentionally, in the beginning, said I'm going to add value to people every day. Now, that I didn't always know how I was going to do it. I didn't always know how to do it, but I just knew I was going to add value to people, and that I was going. When I came away from a relationship with somebody, they were going to look at me and say, "I want him around me because he makes me better." So that's what I did right. It wasn't a career choice. It wasn't like I was brilliant. It was just that I was very committed to every day. And by the way, I do that. I do that now. I do that now. I mean, every day I value people, think of ways to add value to people, look for ways to add value to people, do things that add value to people, and encourage people to add value to each other every day. I still do that. I don't have to do that. I mean, if I want to, I can collect coupons. I don't have to work. I can do a lot of things. I mean, I got all the options in the world for me. But why do I do that? I do that because that's what works. And so when people come to me all the time, I mean, this is so true because I love working with young leaders. Love round tables with kids. And one of their first questions, I mean, I know them like they'll say, well, help me brand myself. I got to get it. And I'll look at it. I'll say, listen to me very carefully. Just get good. Could you get good? If you get good, any brand works. Trust me, you could have the hokey dokey brand. I could care less. When you're good, hokey dokey brand works. And when you're bad, you can't have a slick enough, smart enough brand to help you. Because what eventually happens is you show up. And you either show up good and adding value to people, or you show up bad and you're taking value from people. And so that's what I did right. What I did wrong, and I mean, I did what I did right in 5 minutes. What I did wrong, do you have an hour? I mean, no, I mean, and what I did wrong in the beginning is I tried to be someone else, but not myself, and
Mm.
and I looked at people that I really admired, and I thought, well, I'll try to be like that, and I just found out within about a year and a half of starting out that it just didn't work. It just I constantly fumbled, and I think why isn't this working? Well, it wasn't working because I wasn't who I was. I was trying to be somebody that I admired, thinking I admire them. So if I'm like them, people will admire me too. And what I didn't have is authenticity. And what I've learned about leadership is people don't want a perfect leader, but they do want an authentic leader. And
Mhm.
and they want a leader, Sam, that just says, you know what, I blew that one. That's on me. I I didn't do that right. I made a bad decision there. Let's back up. Let's review this. Let's correct this as quickly as we can because I'm not taking us to the right path. That's what they want, and it takes a little time and confidence and to get that, but I got there. I got there. In fact, fairly quick because I realized what I'm really good at is I'm good at reading the situation and saying I'm doing good or I'm not doing good here. And what I've always done well is when I'm not doing good is I don't stay there. I don't say, well, let's just double the effort. Let's see if I can get double bad here. I pull away and I pivot. And that's a word that we use in COVID now. And I shift and I say, okay, why didn't that work? And what do I need to change? And I've always been very willing to back out and say, hey, we got to do different. We got to do better. The breakthrough leadership book that I wrote, it was Developing the Leader Within You. And the reason that was the breakthrough book, came out a long time ago. It came out in 1991 or two. And the reason it was a breakthrough book is because it was the first book that basically said you can develop yourself as a leader. Up until that time, people had this mistaken idea that you're the born leader. Well, he's a born leader. He's not a born leader. And so people didn't try to develop themselves as a leader. They either thought they had it or they didn't have it. And all of a sudden, I came out with this book that said, no, you can develop yourself as a leader. And in that book, it's the best mentoring book I've ever written too for leadership, because there are 10 things in that book that if you just do those 10 things well, you'll be a very good leader. And so it's very clear, it's very solid, it's very 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so I talk about priorities. You've got to know, if you can't prioritize your life, you'll never be able to lead well, because you'll be doing insignificant things all the time. I talk about servanthood and the fact that if you don't go in with the spirit of adding value to people, that you'll soon, instead of adding value to people, you'll want them to add value to you. And so it's really the solid basic things that I think that a leader does. But when people come to me and they say, John, how do I develop myself as a leader? I always share with them that it begins with qualities. Leadership starts on the inside, not the outside. We think of leadership as outside and all these people follow you, but it really, in essence, it's me having leadership values and qualities that allow me to lead people for the right reason and be effective in leading them. Because what happens is, I teach everything rises and falls on leadership. Well, the fall part on leadership is the fact that this is a leader that doesn't have the values that he or she should have. And so therefore, nothing is better than a good leader, and nothing is worse than a bad one. And so I tell that you either go up or mess up with leaders. And the mess up side is when I lose my way as a leader, and I begin to feel that people are to add value to me. Somebody, I was asked recently, said, John, what's your greatest leadership challenge? And I said, well, my greatest leadership challenge is leading me, honestly. I mean, it's much easier to lead you, Sam. Good Lord, it's much easier for me to tell you what to do and lay it out and say, okay, go do it. But when I have to do it, I have to, all of a sudden it's more than words. It's more than a vision casting speech. It's people do what people see. And so, people follow, leadership is very visual. And so I tell leaders all the time, if you have good values, if you're the right person, the leadership skills, you can learn those. But now people will have a reason to follow you. And it's not, they're following you because you're such a great leader. They're following you because you're such a great person. And that's how you develop great people, is by being a great person. It's interesting when you said you started reading my books and how practical they are, and 1, 2, 3, 4, that whole process. I don't want anybody to miss the steps. Here's what you got to do to go do it. When I started writing, Sam, my publisher didn't like the way I wrote it all, and they said, well, you don't have enough stories, you don't have enough fluff, you don't have enough, the aesthetic value of your books aren't very good. And I looked up and I said, I know that, but I said, I'm not writing my books for that. I'm writing my books to help people. If I'm going to help people, you got to give them steps. And so I said, I'm going to stay with my, 1, 2, 3, 4s. I know that maybe doesn't make me ever a great writer, but hopefully it makes me help people. And it's so funny because now, 34 million books later, it's a beautiful example of be true to yourself. And be true to your mission. And my mission was to add value to people. I never wanted to be a great author. Or a great writer. I always wanted to be a great friend. And I wanted to help people. And so I stayed true to who I was and what I thought would help people. The elementary 1, 2, 3, the steps that aren't sophisticated. And it's worked for me. And I just think that that's another thing is as far as leadership, you've got to be your best self, but you got to be yourself. Don't try to imitate someone else. And, that's always a trap. I want to talk to you about serving others. A great leader serves others. In my 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership book, I talk about the law of addition, and the law of addition is that leaders add value to others by serving them. And I am not a positional leader. I try to be a serving leader, which means I don't have people work for me. I have people work with me. I work with people. And we just help each other to grow and to get better ourselves. And I say that because when I was a young leader in my 20s, I heard a man named Zig Ziglar one time from the stage say that if you will help people get what they want, then they'll help you get everything that you want and need in your life. And this was a paradigm shift for me because I was a young leader and I wasn't interested in helping people get what they want. I was interested in people helping me get what I want. So I was talking about my vision and get on my leadership train. And it was all about helping me. And that day I walked out of that session, I thought, I'm doing it wrong. Instead of asking people to serve me, I need to serve them. Instead of asking people to add value to me, I need to add value to them. So how am I going to do that? And how am I going to do that successfully? Well, I heard that almost 50 years ago. And now with 45, 50 years of serving other people, let me tell you what serving others has taught me. Number one, it's taught me to value people. It's taught me to change from this idea, you need me, to go to the idea, I need you. You know, today I'm 75, and I'm incredibly grateful for the people that I have around me because what I've learned is this, that the more that I've served them, the more that I value them. And the more that I value them, the more value they bring to me. This is incredible. Once we understand how servant leadership works, it's just like we'll never go back to any other kind of leadership again. So serving others has taught me, number one, to value people. Number two, serving others has taught me to value teamwork. One of us is not as smart as all of us. In my early days, if I would get an idea, because I was a young leader, I wanted to make sure everybody thought it was my idea, so I wouldn't share it with anybody. I would think about it, I'd work about it, I'd develop a system, a plan, and then I wanted to walk in and I wanted to sit down and say, okay, here's my incredible plan. And so for many years, I didn't do shared thinking, and I didn't value the teamwork. And then one day I realized that if I just took my idea to the people, in just a few hours, they would make my idea better. In fact, now I've done this thousands of times over the last, 3 or 4 decades. I have never taken an idea to my team that after we talked about it and shared it, every time they've made the idea better. They just have. And so when I started really serving people, I just began to value teamwork and see the return on teamwork. The third thing was when I started serving people, I just became greatly fulfilled. And I became greatly fulfilled because I was going now from success to significance, and I teach often success is about what I accomplish, significance, it's all about you. And the moment that I started valuing people, I found that fulfillment comes in living a significant life. It doesn't come in living a life for myself. And so as I served others, I began to value teamwork. I began to be fulfilled in my life. And so I sat down after understanding the value of serving others, and I asked myself a simple question. What questions can I ask myself that would better help and serve you? And so I asked myself questions such as, what do the people need? Well, I didn't know what the people needed. So I went to them and I said, I would like to lead you well. I'd like to serve you well. What do you need? And they began to talk to me about what they needed. I literally have written all my books off of the fact that when I was in my late 20s, I came to the conclusion that if I could help people do 4 things well, if I could really serve them in these 4 areas, they would be very successful. If I could help them develop relationships, if I could help them learn how to equip others, if I could help them have a phenomenal attitude in life, and if I could help them to lead. And so I just took those 4 things, and every book I wrote was either relationships, equipping, attitude, leadership. It was, again, serving and asking myself, well, what do the people need? And then, once you define what the people need, then you say, okay, now how do I meet that need? What do I do? And in the case I just gave you, I started writing books for people. But I started asking questions. I started listening. I started developing what I call heart skills, which are skills that you show people that you truly care for them. And so when I started valuing people and asking these servanthood questions, I just began to ask myself, how can I inspire other people to serve other people? And the answer is very simple, by modeling it. So with my team, I constantly serve them. In fact, it's kind of a joke, because when you watch our team together, we're always looking for ways to serve each other. And it's almost like, who's the king of the servers? Who's the king of the serving hill? I did this for you. I did that for you. But it's all in fun. But it's all because we understand that when I started serving people, I started valuing people. I started valuing what teamwork was all about. And I really started to be fulfilled in my life. I think you're going to find that in your servanthood also. I just want to encourage you to learn what I have said and practice it this month and serve people and see if it doesn't bring you maybe a little bit greater sense of fulfillment, because you've begun to live this life of significance. I'm so excited to come for another mentoring session with you. And in this time together, I want to talk to you about how to become a world-class leader. Several years ago, I was traveling internationally speaking, and I was in Thailand, and I was answering questions to the news reporter when I landed in that country. And they asked me what it was like to be the world's #1 leadership guru. And I looked at them and I said, well, I don't know. And it's there that they told me that it had just been announced that I was the #1 leadership guru in the world. In fact, they knew it before I knew it. I didn't even know that this had happened. And so that day I realized that, wow, if I'm the nation's or the world's #1 leadership guru, this has been a good journey for me. So I asked myself, well, how did I achieve that? If I really am, then how did I get to that position? How did I become the world's #1 leadership guru? Well, I'm going to talk to you about how to do this. I'm going to talk to you right now about how you can become a world-class leader. So these are my practical steps to you as I, your friend, John Maxwell, mentor you. Number 1, start with yourself. Don't start with the world. Don't even start with your team. Start with yourself. It's kind of like this. The #1 leadership challenge I have is not leading others. The #1 leadership challenge I have is leading me. You see, it's easy for me to tell you what to do, but for me to do it myself, now that's a whole different story. That's a whole different level. And so I don't want you to miss this, because it's so important for me that you start by leading yourself. In other words, you start by being the example for your team, because your team is going to be like you. So if you develop good leadership qualities, if you develop good leadership practices in your life, guess what? Your team will follow. I've learned that it's easier to tell other people what to do than to do it myself. I've learned that I'm my #1 leadership challenge. So when John Maxwell, who's become the world's #1 leadership guru, where does he start? Not with the world, not with even my team. I start with myself. I make sure that I'm the example I want my team to see, so I can truly say to them, follow me. The second step in becoming a world-class leader is to start for the right reasons. Often I'll talk to young leaders and they say, well, I want to be a leader. And I always ask them the question, why do you want to be a leader? And I'm always interested in their answer. Sometimes people will say, well, I want to become a leader because I want I want to be in control, and I want to be first, and I want people to look up to me. When they begin to talk about selfish reasons for wanting to be a leader, well, I'll make more money, or I'll have a higher position, or I'll be the boss, I know immediately that they're in trouble. Because you don't lead for what it benefits you. The only reason to lead is to benefit others. Leadership is all about other people. It's not about you. It's not about me. And so what I've realized is that the people who are successful in the long run leading is because they became a leader to add value to the people around them. Again, that's the question. When I meet with presidents of countries, in fact, as I'm teaching you today, just in a couple days, I'll be in another country, and I'll be meeting with the president. In fact, I'll be talking to Congress in that country. I'll be talking to the Supreme Court. I'll be talking to many leaders. I've been going to be on nationwide television. And when I'm alone with, like, the president of a country, and it's just the two of us, I always look at them and I ask them this question: since you're the president of the country, since you're the leader of the country, who's getting the most benefit, your people or you? You see, the only reason to lead is to give the people the benefit. The only reason for you and me to lead is to add value to others. That is essential. You don't want to miss it. So how do you become a world-class leader? Start with yourself. Number 2, start for the right reason to add value to people. Number 3, just start small. I love this. You know, mass movements don't begin with a mass. They begin with a few people who just are passionate and committed to make a difference in the people's lives and those around them. And so when you start for the right reason, you're starting to benefit again and help others and make a difference in their life. When you start small, you're realizing that if you can't lead a few, you'll never be able to lead many. So when sometimes people say, well, I want to lead a big team, I say, well, honestly, can you lead a small team? Can you lead 2 or 3? If you can lead 2 or 3, maybe you can lead 20 or 30. Maybe at a time you can lead 200 or 300. Maybe someday 2,000 or 3,000. But you start small. You don't start big. You know, Mother Teresa was asked one time, how do you feed the world? I love her answer. She said, start with 1. How true, how simple, but how helpful. Mother Teresa said, start with 1. If you can feed 1 well, guess what? You can go with 2, and then with 3. And as I say that, when people look at me as a world-class leader, literally 50 years ago, I started with 3 people. Just 3. And one of them was me and 2 others. I started small, but it's okay. If you can lead small well, you can lead medium well. Someday you'll be able to lead big well, but start small. The 4th thing I want to talk to you about, and this is so essential to becoming a world-class leader, is that you need to be consistent. You don't become a world-class leader by being inconsistent. You don't become a world-class leader by quitting. It's every day doing the right thing, the main thing. It's doing those everyday essentials that will make you very successful in your life. And believe me, at 74, I can tell you this is a fact. Consistency compounds. If you will keep doing the right thing every day, someday you're going to reap a huge return. It's kind of like, maybe to illustrate it, if there was this big boulder, big rock, and I wanted to break it, and I had like a sledgehammer, a big hammer to pound that rock. When I started, I would know that the first time I hit that sledgehammer on that rock, that there was not going to be anything that would be shown as making progress with that rock. It wouldn't crack. It would just be there. And so I keep pounding the rock. I keep pounding the rock. And for many times, I'm not seeing any progress. I'm not seeing any kind of positive results of all that pounding. But, if I just keep pounding the rock, you know what happens? Eventually, all of a sudden, the rock cracks and then it breaks. Now, the day I hit that sledgehammer on that rock and it broke, would everybody say, oh my gosh, that was the magic hit. That one right there, that was the one that broke the rock. No. Every hit was magic. Maybe hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of hits. I don't know. But every hit was magic because it was going towards the specific goal of breaking that rock. What I want you to do is this. Consistency compounds. Recently, they told me that I've written more leadership material than any person that has ever lived in the history of the world. Now, if that's true, people would ask, John, how have you written more leadership material than any person that's ever lived in the history of the world? It's very simple. I write every day. Every day, I'm writing. That compounds. After tens of thousands of days in my life, I'm now the number one leadership author as far as written material that the world has ever known. But how did I get there? Consistency. I write my books one word at a time. You live your life one day at a time, but be consistent. If you'll do those four things, you'll be a world-class leader, and that's the truth.
Roddy, I've heard John say often, leaders are readers. And I agree with that. I also think that leaders are speakers. Now, not all of you are tuning in because you will speak in front of 100, 200, 500,000 people in the next 7 days. But trust me on this, leaders that listen in and week out, you are communicating. By the way, you may not be very vocal. You may be an introvert. Trust me on this, leaders, you are communicating. And Roddy, I'm going to prove to our podcast audience that you got the goods. Has anybody in our live audience, your communication been impacted 10 times, a 10x factor because of Roddy Galbraith? Fantastic. And podcast listeners, I've been watching, and Roddy did not pay them to do that. This is true. Roddy is one of the best communicators that we've got. Thank you. And just an incredible artist in the area of communication. So, Roddy, welcome, buddy.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Great to be here. I thought we'd kind of dig a little bit into John's new book, The 16 Undeniable Laws of Communication. And if you don't have a copy of this book, incidentally, how many of you have the book already? It's a great book, and I say that not to sell the book, but I think not for what it will do for John and for you, but for what it will do for you. It's a great book. It's packed with great stuff. It really is. And can I just share a couple of thoughts on this?
Please do. I'd love that.
Before we begin? So I've been a professional speaker and speaker trainer for the last 17 years, just over, and I've had the opportunity to work with some great speakers, John Maxwell, of course, but others as well, like Les Brown and Nick Vujicic, Seth Godin, and many others. And I've had the opportunity to see how the world's best communicators do what they do. But I've also had the opportunity to work one-to-one with well over 10,000 people and see, of all of that stuff that the great communicators do, what can most people do most of the time? What works for most people most of the time? And this book, I think, practically everything in here anyone can take and start implementing. You know, John talks about putting the cookies on the lower shelf. This book is packed with stuff that you can use right away. So I really encourage you, everyone really, to get it. And you alluded to this at the beginning. Who should get this book? I think everyone should get it, because we are all communicators, whether we realize it or not. We're all communicating all the time. We're social beings. We interact with one another. We want to do great things in life. We want to achieve things of significance, and that is going to be with and through other people, isn't it? And the thing about other people is we need to communicate with them. And so the better we get at communicating, I think the better we get at life.
You know, we start every podcast, or we in the pre-production, in the pre-thinking of the podcast, we always have the standout statement. And you kind of alluded to this, but I want to dig a little bit deeper. Our standout statement today is everyone has something to say. Everyone. So talk a little bit about that and what that means to you, and kind of underscore that statement for me.
Yeah, I think it's true. Everyone has something to say. Everyone has something to say. So if you're a leader, I know this is a leadership podcast. If you're a leader, you have a team of people, you have a company, of course, you better have something to say, because how are you going to cast vision, and how are you going to unite people behind that vision, and how are you going to encourage them and motivate them and inspire them to move towards that? You have to have something to say if you're a leader. But also, if you're a salesperson, if you're selling something, then you have a product that you passionately believe can help people. It's not going to sell itself. You know, you need to do that. You need to communicate that to people so they can see the value that it brings. They don't necessarily know that this product is a great solution to a problem that they have unless you articulate that to them. Mm-hmm. So if you're a leader, you've got to have something to say. If you're a salesperson, you've got to have something to say. If you're a job seeker or a student, you've got to have something to say, because then you're selling yourself. And when you go for an interview and you try and get a job, it's not the best candidate that gets the role. It's the candidate that can best articulate the value that they can bring that gets the job. And so interviewing just isn't a perfect science. And so it's more of a communication challenge than anything else. So I think if you're a leader, if you're selling something, if you're a student or a job seeker, you've got to have something to say. But
yeah,
if I can just
please.
You got to have something to say. You got to have something to say, but that's not enough on its own. That's not enough on its own. It's more than just having something to say, because if you have something to say and you say it, it comes out of your mouth, it leaves your lips, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it lands with the other person. They may not hear you, they may not understand what you're saying, they may not agree with what you're saying, and they definitely may not accept it. And so we've got to work hard to make our message land with the people that we're speaking to.
Yeah, you know, so I would agree with you, and we've just kind of established leaders should have something to say, right, or we're in trouble. So if you're leading and you don't have something to say, you may not be leading. Just a kind of a observation for you. So we've got something to say, but isn't it true that so many people, the greatest fear for most people is fear of public speaking or standing up or having eyes on you. So how would you encourage someone to overcome fear and unleash their voice?
Yeah, I think this is a question that comes up all the time, because they say it's the number one fear, don't they? Everyone's scared of communicating. Well, let's just check in the room here. How many of you would like to be more confident when you speak in front of other people? Can we see your hands? Yeah, practically every hand goes up. Anywhere around the world, whenever I ask that, everyone would like to be a little bit more confident when they speak. I think the thing is, first of all, to realize if that is you, you're a little bit anxious of speaking in front of other people, that's okay. That's almost everyone. If you don't feel anxious when you speak in front of other people, you're probably in the minority. So it's okay to feel a little bit anxious. And then it's useful to think a little bit about the context of where the fear comes from and what it does for us. Because kind of years and years ago in our past, danger and fear were very closely related. You know, if you're living and you're walking out a long time ago and you're fearful, it probably is a life or death situation. You know, you may be about to die if something happens. And so what do you do in that situation? You want to run. You want to get out of there. But nowadays, the threats that we face, the link between fear and danger is not quite the same. A lot of the things that we're scared of now are not life or death situations. And actually, the running from them or avoiding those things is the worst thing we can do. It's actually turning around and facing them and dealing with those things, which is most beneficial to us. So it's changed completely. We need to find a way to step forward into the fear, because if we allow it to kind of make us turn away and run away, we'll be running from it for the rest of our lives. So we've got to find a way to step forward into the things that we're afraid of, and then we see it for what it is. We see it's not dangerous, and that's the only way that we're going to outgrow it. So we have to find a way to step into it.
You know, it's so interesting. Our podcast family lets me use personal family all the time, but about 4 weeks ago now, I had the most rewarding parental experience that I've had ever. And I've talked a little bit about it on the podcast, but I went on a father-daughter week of focus with my now 17-year-old. She's had a birthday. And Macy was super impacted this week, and we were given an opportunity in a crowd of 400 people to talk about the impact of the week, right? Now, for those of you that have not met Macy or not heard about Macy on the podcast, sometimes I have to remind Macy that people can be pets too, because she loves animals, and sometimes she could take or leave me and you, okay? She's got this kind of affinity toward animals, and people, again, sometimes I have to remind her that they can be friendly too. And so Macy, we were at this event, and I'm telling you, the first student, there was one other person that spoke. Macy got up in front of hundreds of people and shared for about 1.5 minutes the impact that the week had on her. Roddy, it blew me away. I've never heard her speak in public. I never even knew she knew that she was supposed to speak to people that she didn't know. We made a lot of steps that day. And I asked Macy afterwards, I said, why did you do that? And she said, because I had to use my voice to help somebody else. This was a 16-year-old. And it was my moment of realizing, thank you, Macy, way to go, way to go.
Go, Macy.
It was the moment that I realized something, Roddy, that when you have passion, when you understand purpose, and when you have a pitch, you have something to say. When you have passion, you have purpose, and you have a pitch. What do I mean by pitch? Listen to John Maxwell or any great communicator. Listen to Roddy. They are always taking you toward something. No great communicator gets up to entertain. Now, I've met some great speakers, but a great communicator gets up to try to inspire others to do something. That's the pitch. That's getting people to do something with what they've got. And I've watched you every time you finish one of your talks. You are challenging people, and most of the time it's challenging them to do better at communicating themselves, because getting people to take action is a huge part of communication. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. I think that's the key to overcoming fear, is you have to take action into the fear. But just to pick up on what you were saying there, when there's something that's important to you, often then either we're shoved in front of an audience maybe because our boss tells us we have to go and speak to the audience, or there's something that we really want that's worth failing for, that's worth facing the fear. And what happens then is that we realize that we can do it. We can do it. And the fear doesn't mean we can't learn to do it. The fear is not a reflection of reality. It's not a reflection of our potential. It's just a program that we've picked up in the past. And if it's something that's important to us that makes us do it, we prove to ourselves, actually, we're way more capable than we realize. We can outgrow fear, but we have to do it by stepping into the fear, not by running away from it.
That's beautiful. You talked about a little bit earlier this book. I'm going to tell John Maxwell he'll be very proud of you for talking about his book and endorsing it.
I love it.
But this is the book, and for those of you watching, I'm holding the book up. It's 16 Undeniable Laws of Communication. We'll put it in the show notes. We'll give you a discount if you use the passcode podcast. But in this book, John says, good work must be stored up before it shows up. In other words, what John is saying, consistency compounds, but so does credibility. So how does that relate to communication and leadership?
Well, I think it relates in a number of different ways, actually. Taking the kind of the building up and towards credibility, John says that leadership is influence. And I think it's really useful when we're learning about communication to think of influence as something that sits on top of a foundation. And if you get the foundation in place, then maybe the influence is going to happen. If you don't get the foundation in place, then maybe it's not going to happen. In fact, it's almost certainly not going to happen. So there's 3 kind of layers to that. The first one is connecting with the person or the people that you're speaking to. So connecting with your audience. And in here, John's got a chapter on connecting. Chapter 7, page 125. I won't read it all to you, but if you have the book, read the beginning of that chapter. He basically says that sometimes authors put great stuff in a book and leave you to find it for yourself. And then he says, this is not one of these times. Let me be very clear. The law of connecting is by far the most important idea in this entire book. The law of connecting is by far the most important idea in this entire book. So connecting is the first kind of layer that you need to establish. So the audience needs to feel like they know, like, and trust you, basically. They need to get that in place. They know, like, and trust you. And if you think about it, the order there is important because they need to know you first so that they can like you, so that they can then trust you. If they don't know you, how can they trust you if they don't know who you are? So they have to get to know you. And this is important because it means that we can't pretend to be something else. We can't pretend to be someone else. We can't hold up a mask. We can't hide behind something. We have to be ourselves. So being ourselves is important. And you've probably heard John say, you should always be yourself. unless you stink, in which case don't
Change.
In case don't be yourself. So most of us probably, it's important that we're ourselves, we're authentically us, and then we can connect with the audience. Then the next layer is credibility. And for credibility, we need that authenticity, so we're being ourselves. In order to be authentic, we need to be comfortable being a little vulnerable in front of the audience, and then we need to be honest about who we are. And so then they know who they're connecting with, they get a good feeling about trusting us. The third layer, we won't talk about it now because it doesn't fit in with your question, but the third layer then on top of the connecting credibility is then it needs to be relevant to the audience. So
It needs to be what?
Relevant. Sharing something relevant.
Yep.
Because if you think about it, you could be a very likable expert with a message that's just not relevant to them. So of course you're not going to get them to buy a car if they're not in the market for a car. Or even if you're a great car salesman, you know a lot about cars. So connect, credible, and then something relevant. Now, the credibility comes best, and John talks a lot about this, about sharing what you've lived out. Don't learn stuff in the book and then repeat it. That doesn't give you credibility, but talking on your experiences and what you've lived out gives you great credibility. So the mistakes you've made is gold there. Mm-hmm. The failures you've made, things where it's all gone wrong and you've made a fool of yourself, what you've learned from that is great to share with your audience because they can really relate to that. That's probably where they are, making mistakes, and what you've learned from them can really help them. So sharing what you've lived out, what you've learned from that helps you connect with the audience and establishes your credibility in a very authentic way. But it builds. You need to build towards it. That consistency compounds.
Man, that's good stuff. South Florida, you proud of this guy right here? That is good. Communication is such a huge part of motivating others, and that's what leaders have to do. What would you say to a leader who is struggling to motivate her team through communication?
So I think that builds actually perfectly on what we were just talking about. There's a lot of research that shows that a line manager and an employee, the relationship between them is key to the performance of the company, actually. But the trouble is, in a lot of companies, they don't teach their leaders how to work on that relationship, or they don't teach them leadership skills, or very often, actually. It's changed a little bit in the last 20 years, but not enough, I don't think. People don't see leadership as a separate skill set. So they'll take the best technician and they'll say, you clearly know the most, so you're going to make the best leader for the accounts team or whatever it is. And then, not seeing leadership as a separate skill set, they just do what they were doing before, and they're not leading the team. They're probably hiding themselves away in their new office. They're not spending enough time with the team, and it's very demotivating. So they've lost a great technician, in this case an accountant, and then gained a crappy manager that's demotivating for everyone. So if you can work on that relationship, another one of my favorite books, Leadership Gold, by John Maxwell, if you didn't know, Mark.
That's good. That's good.
There's a chapter in there called People Don't Leave Companies, They Leave People.
Yep.
And so if you've got a bad manager, you think it's a bad company and you want to leave. But if you've got a great manager, you think it's a great company and you want to stay, and you'll give everything to them. So working on that relationship, I think, buys you so much goodwill with the employees. And not working on that relationship is doomed, really. They're not going to. They're just going to hide. And people become experts, of course, in big organizations of hiding and just doing the minimum to get by. But if they do know that you care, they feel the company's great, then they give so much more discretionary effort that they don't otherwise.
So we've talked a lot about leadership and communication, and we've talked most of it about speaking or talking.
Right.
So let's transition to the other side of communication, one that I've worked for a lot of leaders. They don't know there's two sides to communication. Let's talk about listening. Why is listening so important for great communication?
Well, listening is incredibly important. If you think about it, when we're speaking, like when it's two of us, it's obviously it's a communication. But when you're on stage and you're speaking, even to a large audience, you're still connecting with people one-to-one. You're still communicating with people one-to-one. You may remember, you might have been there, I don't know, when John spoke at the Georgia Dome to 64,000 people, yep. And he sat down on the edge of the stage and he's looking out and talking to the audience. And they came up to him afterwards and said, I felt like you were talking just to me. I felt like you were talking just to me. 64,000 people thinking, you're talking just to me, because he's connected with them and he's sharing something relevant with them, and he's obviously an expert. So it's very personal. So it's not an audience, it's a one-to-one connection, even though you're talking to an audience. So connecting with the audience is key. Going back to the leadership example, if you listen to your team, they know that you care. They know that you value their opinion. And so that's a great way to connect. So listening is great to connect with your team. It's also useful to find out about them, because you're not sharing a message that you want to share. Well, lots of communicators do that. But then you're just answering questions that no one's asking, which is, obviously a problem. So we want to help the audience, so we need to listen to them to find out where they are. We need to listen to them to find out who they are and what they're struggling with, so that we can share something that's relevant with them.
I've told this on the podcast before, but I love the story. It was an event much like the event that you were just talking about, where John spoke 64,000 people. There's about 15, 20,000 people. A young communicator, first time on a stage that big, came up to John and he said, "Hey, John, what are you thinking about right now?" And John said, "I'm thinking about the people." The guy said, "You're not thinking about your opening line, how you're going to wow them in the first 5 seconds like Roddy teaches?" John said, "No." He said, "You're not thinking about how you're going to close it down, the gripping story?" And John, "No. I don't even know how I'm going to close it down yet." This freaked the guy out. I literally saw the guy's knees starting to shake. Oh, Lord, I've been thinking of the wrong things on my first opportunity. I'm in trouble. But what John was really saying is even while on stage, he is listening to the audience. I got one more John Maxwell story for you, Roddy, that involves you. I'll never forget, as long as I live, when you sit down, this would have been 10 years ago probably. You sit down, 8 years maybe, you sit down and show John what you had extrapolated from how he connects with an audience. You remember this?
9 years ago it was.
9 years ago, exactly. He remembers. What time was it that day? I'm just kidding.
2:32.
The 2:32. It absolutely, I'd never seen somebody come up and show John a gift of his with such clarity on why it was a gift. You remember that? That was not put on. In fact, for months after that, Roddy, John said, "Well, Roddy said I do this right here. Well, Roddy, this right here." Roddy told the master communicator why he did. Now, listen, this is why I say this. The best connection, the best content, and the best effect that a communicator can have is not determined by his eloquence or even his content. It's about the receptivity of the person listening. Here's why I love that about John. John's a great communicator. You told him that multiple times in that conversation that day. But you told him why he was a good communicator, and he was able to take that, listen, and go perfect that craft. And he was already speaking to hundreds of thousands of people. My question to you and I, leader, how are you perfecting your communication? What are you doing? How are you ensuring that it's better? And Roddy, this is not a shameless plug for you, but that's what you do day in and day out. How many hours of video have you observed for people so you could give them a critique?
Oh, well, thousands and thousands and thousands, well over 10,000 people. So
10,000 people, hours and hours, Roddy spends breaking it down, what they did well, what they didn't do well with connecting and getting their message across. And isn't that science, the difference between great communicators that have one good stump speech and communicators that can sustain for many, many speeches, many, many different subjects?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when people start that process, it's all new, because everyone thinks they've got a great story that everyone's going to love. But when you dig into it, actually, the reason you want to share it is because it's all about you and you look good to the audience. And gradually you learn what works from the audience and not from your perspective. And then when you learn, you can adapt it to other stories and different speeches and messages. So it becomes self-sustaining.
There's very few meetings that I finish, leaders out there. And again, some of you are taking a lot down to be a better stage communicator. But I'm going to break it down for those of us that have to run meetings day in and day out. The best feedback I get is afterwards when I ask a couple of people, somebody from my inner circle, somebody that I really wanted to get the message, hey, what did you hear me say? And podcast listeners, people here, the best feedback you will get is when you slow down and listen to the feedback rather than listen to the affirmation. There's not much meat in the affirmation, people. There's a lot more meat when you ask somebody, what did you hear me say? Hey, let's go on. John has another quote here in the book. It says, your content will only be as good as your research. I know we live in a world where people speak before they think, or at least they have to, because some of the stuff they say, it has to have thoughts not included, okay? Batteries not included, thought was not included in what I just said. And so I'm gonna ask you, how important is research? And kind of talk a little bit about how you research and how leaders and communicators should research before speaking.
Yeah, I think researching anything is important. For me, I allow as much time as possible for that because I enjoy that process probably the most out of the preparation phase. And so for me, it would be, if for this book, for example, I would get it on Audible and I would just listen to it when I'm taking the kids to school, when I'm driving around, walking the dogs, just listen to it and soak it up. Then I would dive into the book for the bits that resonate with me that I think would be useful for that particular audience and then go through them in detail and collect them. And then as soon as possible, get to the first draft. The first draft is where you've got something down and dirty that you can then start saying out of your mouth. Because I think the biggest mistake people make in preparation is they think, as a speaker, preparing means to have a script. And that's the preparation. And if I've got a script, then I'm going to be safe. But a script is it's no use to you in front of an audience, really, is it? Unless you're going to read it or you're going to just post it to them or send it to them, it's no use. So you need to start saying something as quickly as possible. And the quicker you get to a first draft that you can then start experimenting with different ways of saying, the quicker you're going to make progress. So get to the first draft, then start practicing. People don't like that word, practice, but if we did this 10 times, which would be best, the first one or the 10th one?
The 10th one. The 10th one. Well, maybe
significantly.
The 8th. Maybe the 8th. I kind of start reaching this apex and start coming down, as you said earlier. But so maybe the 8th.
Well, that's. Do you know? Somebody asked John that. I think it was one of your team said, I can't do this presentation. I'm getting bored of it because I'm doing it over and over and over again. He said, but it's not about you. It's about the audience. They've never heard it before. Wow. And so you've got to make sure that you're bringing your A game. Keep the magic of the first time for the audience because that's who you're trying to serve.
You know what Roddy just did, podcast listeners, family? He just called me out and y'all didn't even know it. I was the one that said that, and he said one of my teammates said it. I said it
was that you?
Romania. I said it on a trip Roddy and I just did, speaking in Romania. I said, man, I got to go do the same talk. I'm kind of getting bored. And he just called me out. Thank you very much. Podcast listeners, you may not hear that section in the podcast live. Hey, seriously, one of the things Roddy does, and I have 2 more questions, and then I got a little hot seat question for you. One of the things that Roddy does day in and day out is he does for people what he did for John Maxwell that day. He spends time, takes time reviewing talks, reviewing content, reviewing speeches, presentations, body tics. I mean, you focus on all of it. And then he helps and coaches people get better. One more time, people here in Florida that's been impacted by Roddy Galbraith making you a better communicator. Can I hear you one more time?
Thank you. Thank you.
And we have a lot of people in our podcast family that you have. And leave us a comment on YouTube or Spotify, wherever you listen to this podcast. Leave a comment. We'll show them to Roddy as long as it doesn't make his head get too big. But if you'd like to join our team, if you'd like to be a better communicator, a better speaker, this is a team, Maxwell Leadership Certified Speaker, Certified Team, is a place to where we want communicators, even people that are not on stage, to become a better communicator. So you can go to maxwellleadership.com/join the team. maxwellleadership.com/join the team. And we would love to have you be a part of our incredible community. All right, give me an example of a leader who has mastered the art of communication and how you have seen it impact their organization.
A good example of that recently, actually, someone that I've been working with for a while, they joined the team about 5 years ago, I think. Travis and Amanda Lefevre, I think you know. Well, they went to Paraguay with you, didn't they, on the plane? Do you know much about their organization?
I do.
It's extraordinary. And so Travis has been working on like a weekly address. He does 2 addresses to the team and he sends me the videos of them. And he stands up in front of his team in this warehouse of like, I think they got 90 employees or something. And they're building, it's called Mission Mobile Medical. So they take old Winnebagos, I guess they're called, or whatever, you know, and they turn them into mobile medical units. It's an amazing thing because it puts healthcare into the rural areas where people otherwise just don't bother going because they don't get the care they need. And so he's got this team, they got a great culture, and he does a little talk on Mondays and Wednesdays, the before the show, he calls it, or before the game, and the halfway show. And he shares a little personal development tip or growth or a leadership lesson for them. And he's been doing that. And he's getting better and better at them, actually. And Amanda too. And the company the growth over the last 3 years, unbelievable how much it's grown. So I think that's a great example of you've got a load of people in a warehouse all doing different things, getting them together a couple of times a week. They do a few other things, and then he shares an encouraging message with them, and they're thinking, this is a great organization to be a part of.
I love that. I love that you called them out too, because truly their business, the trajectory of their business,
it's amazing.
And it all comes back to his ability to stand, or one of the big contributors is their ability to stand.
Yeah.
All right, so how does leaders, we're in a crazy time to where everybody is getting offended about everything. How does How does a leader strike a balance between assertiveness and empathy in their communication?
Well, that's a good question. So I think in an organization, we talked a little bit about this, you've got the opportunity to compound connecting with your team or the people that you're speaking to. And so you have that ability to build up goodwill with them. So that if you're going to put your foot in it, which, you can't avoid some things. You can't tiptoe around them because you're worried about saying the wrong thing. And if you do that, you're going to say the wrong thing. I'll give you a simple example of this. It's a silly example, but it makes me laugh every time. Me and Susan went to Starbucks, and we walked in, and Susan's standing there waiting to order the drinks, and the person in front has been rude to the barista. And so she's saying, that's not my drink, and that's cold, and I'm not drinking that, and pushes the coffee all over the thing, and then storms off. And Susan says to the barista, I'm so sorry about that. And she said, no, it's fine. She said, it's not fine. You do such a great job, you provide a great service, and you shouldn't have to put up with idiots like that. And she said, no, it's fine, it's my mum. So we're like, okay, see you tomorrow, off we go. So, but my point is, I just couldn't stop laughing, and Susan was like getting annoyed. But my point is, she's saying, I hate that when people are rude to people for no reason, and so I want to. My instinct is to comfort them and to empathize with them and to try and make them feel better. And I'm going to do that even if I do put my foot in it every now and again. And so I think with your team, if you can build that goodwill, or what did Covey call it, the emotional bank account, if you can build goodwill with them and your intentions are good, and they know you care, then they're going to forgive you if you're saying the wrong thing every now and again.
Incredible. Okay, one last question, hot seat question.
Okay.
I've just started asking this when guests come on, because this is a leadership podcast, it's a personal growth podcast. So the leader, living or dead, who has impacted you the most, and how?
Ooh, I wish I'd known you were going to ask me that, because I'd really think about that. The leader, living or dead, who's influenced me the most, and how?
And how?
The first thing that comes to mind is probably not the best example, but my first job, which I've talked about, I lucked out with my boss. He was into personal growth. He was a great leader. And it was my first job. I was 25. I won't tell you the story, but I didn't get my first job until I was 25. And so he really helped me. He got me into personal growth. He taught me a lot of great lessons. For me, it was normal to say, I drove the car with a bigger engine and claim more miles on my expense thing. And he said, leaders don't do that. You don't do that on yours. And he wasn't angry or anything. He's just saying, you've got to realize you've got to treat the company's money like it's your own. And he just taught me so many little lessons like that. So for me, it had such a big impact, because I was, in the pub before that every day. And now suddenly I had a job and I was a grown up. And he made an enormous impact. In fact, if you're listening, Alan, thank you very much. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah. That's awesome. Well, I love that. I love that question. I love the different people that walk into our life. And that's what happens on this podcast. We bring people in. John Maxwell so often has came into our life and helped us. But South Florida podcast listeners, has Roddy Galbraith just dropped gold for us today?
Thank you.
I'm reminded as a leader that what you say, how you say it, and how you live it is so important. And what our goal today has been to help you leaders, help you people that are passionate about getting your message, your influence out there greater. Because we know that your audience, your team, your family needs to hear your message, but they need to see your message as much as they need to hear it.
One of the things that Joel has partnered with us on is really coaching leaders in the C-suite and the executive space in a program that we call Executive Circle. And I've had the privilege to ride shotgun with him and listen and to the content and the conversation. And this topic today is something that he is dealing with and gets more questions, especially in his one-on-one coaching of those executive circle members. And it's just saying, hey, I'm overwhelmed in my job. There's not enough hours in a day. And where should I be spending my time? Where do I get the most efficiency out of my day? And you just share with them transparently. I've heard you say, I've done it wrong. I did it wrong for a lot of years. It cost me, it was a high price. And I spent 20 hours a day working. That's not the right way to go about it. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about where Joel is and what he believes is how great leaders spend their time. Talk just as we introduce, talk a little bit about your heart for this message and what you're hearing from the leaders that you're coaching.
Well, first of all, I appreciate the introduction. And it really is because I've done it wrong through some of my career. And I've made some big mistakes, both personally and professionally. And we'll get to that. And I feel a huge burden to share what I've learned with other leaders because it is lonely and it's really, really hard work and there's no playbook out there.
Right.
And I've done just a ton of learning myself, reading, talking to other CEOs, and have come up with this 5-part model. And I know a lot of things are in steps of 5, but
I love it.
But it ended up being so relevant that we made the entire executive circle curriculum around this. So Chris mentioned executive circle. It's 12 months of curriculum, but it's built around these 5 things because how you spend your time is everything.
Yeah.
And so it's just very near and dear to my heart.
That's good.
Well, let's start. Number 1, I love it. It says, share the vision and strategy of your department or organization. Sounds simple, but that's pretty profound.
Yeah, and if you don't mind, I'm just going to give all 5 at a really, just so they know what's coming.
That's great.
Because you wouldn't intuitively start here necessarily, but it's share the vision. Where are we headed? The second thing is share the values of the company. The third, and live out the values of the company. Yeah. The third is to manage the business. And the fourth is to make others successful. And the fifth thing is to keep yourself healthy. So that's what we're going to just walk through at a very high level. But sharing the vision is not just something that the CEO should do. It really, I don't care if you're managing one person or even managing your home, everyone should kind of share the vision of where we're headed. And I just mean directionally, what is the department's vision, what's the company's vision, and more importantly, how is every employee, they need to see their role in that. Yeah. And when that happens, they come alive. Yeah. And I think great visions, to that point, great visions go beyond the financials. It needs to be something that people can really connect to. It makes the world a better place. For instance, at Hershey Enterprises, which we run Dolly Parton's parks, it was make memories worth repeating for family. Or at SeaWorld, it was come to the park and help save the planet. And so everything they were doing was try to make the world a better place. And I just think that's really, really important because once you do that, people know what the plan is and they know what their role is within it.
I kind of was brought up that you share the vision at the January kickoff meeting, and that's enough because they got it. And you realize
hear from it again.
They don't got it. The continuous sharing. What's your view on how often do you do that?
You know, I do like at a big level, like high level, the CEO doing it at least annually like that. But then as you unpeel the onion, every strategy has a set of plans and tactics that every employee is assigned, and then there's key result areas for each of those tactics, right? It's like you got to hit a sales goal. How are you exactly going to do that? How many calls you're going to make? What's your close rate? Whatever. That should be reviewed weekly, I think. And so that when you get down to the frontline level, everyone should know what their role is rolling up to that macro strategy.
Why did what I do matter in the vision that we're doing
Exactly,
here?
exactly.
That's great. Well, the second one that you mentioned, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about is live the values of your department or organization. And when you first introduced it, you said, the values, and you said, no, live them out, right?
Yeah.
Live the values. Talk about the importance of that as a leader, spending their time living out their values.
Well, most companies that I've seen have what I would call, actually Cheryl Batchelor, CEO of Popeyes, used to say, we have a plaque problem, because people would put their values on a plaque and that's it, right? Not a teeth plaque.
Oh, that's where I was going. I thought you were going to talk about the dentist.
Pull
I
out
was
the
like, where are we
dental
going with
floss.
this? Yeah, that's
No.
right.
It's so critical that every organization defines exactly what their values are. And you mentioned my book, and I appreciate that, but that's what Love Works is all about. Every company has do goals, and they should have be goals.
I love that.
The do goals are the financials. It's what we have to do to hit our targets. It's our sales, our margin. A lot of companies, other than putting on a plaque, don't focus on their B goals. And I think that's why cultures tend to be weak. And to have a strong culture, we need to define the values, your do and your be, and then everyone needs to try to live up to it. Now, everybody makes mistakes. Every day, even with Love Works, I probably made a mistake a day on the values. The key is, again, it's a vision.
Yeah.
How do we want to behave? How do we want our leaders to behave? And are people holding you accountable? And I knew the culture was really working when people would come into my office and say, you lost your patience, or you weren't very kind in this circumstance. And then you know the culture's working.
that's
So
good.
that's what I mean by living it out.
Catching people living the values, and what are those behaviors? I love that.
It's very hard to do
I
sometimes.
recall, I read your book when it first came out, and about be and do was really, I had not thought about it that way. And I started sharing that on coaching calls. It really resonates with people that we're always talking about do, but we're not ever really, nobody ever goes the further step about be. And
And
it
I
made a
think,
difference.
someday I wanna write a book about what it takes to really take those values and integrate it into the culture, because there's several steps to do that. You can't just talk about it. You have to teach it. You have to reinforce it. You have to promote it. And just only about 10% of the companies do that. So it's really important. If you want to be a great leader, this will really differentiate you.
So we're talking about what leaders should do with their time, and this one seems kind of obvious: manage the business. But
Yeah.
go take that a little deeper for us.
It is obvious, Perry, but the key point is most leaders, they spend almost all their time there. So even though it's the third one, most people don't share the vision. They don't focus on living out the values, and they don't get to the last two either. So I think the key point to talk about in managing the business is, how do we get out of some of the day-to-day and delegate more? And for me, it took me forever to learn this. In fact, when I was in the auto industry, I led as an expert. I started on the plant floor. I actually owned and ran car dealerships. So I had been everywhere, and I led as an expert much more autocratically. But when I went into the theme park business as a CEO, I was forced to be very Socratic and ask a ton of questions. But what I found is that allowed me to delegate more, and I could focus on the other areas of great leadership. And for people on the call or who are listening here to the podcast, if they struggle with delegation, I have one question it's really the best question I've ever been taught in delegating. Is, and the chairman taught me this at Hershen Enterprises: what is the worst thing that can happen, and can you live with it? What's the worst thing that can happen, and can you live with it? And more times than not, the downside isn't that great. And we should let go of those decisions so that we can focus on the other four parts of this model. And so if you struggle with delegation, it's just something to think about.
Well, that comes up a lot. I always ask, we do a lot of 5 levels of leadership workshops and things, and it comes up about, are you doing the things that only you can do?
Yeah.
And are you delegating the other? And John Maxwell talks quite a bit about,
Yes.
if somebody can do it 80% as well as you delegate, let it go. But almost every leader says, yeah, I delegating, that's big. I said, how are you? Not very good.
Right.
Why? And it usually comes down to, I don't trust I can do it as well as I can. I just love what you just said. So what's the worst that can, say it again, what the worst that can happen?
And can I live with it? Or can the company live with it?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, man, I am so glad you brought that point. And you're right, John has talked about that every day when I went into work at SeaWorld and it was such a mess, I asked John's question: what are the things that only I can do? Mm-hmm. That is a great question also for delegation. Mm-hmm. And when you get down to that, and sometimes we don't want to go there because we're uncomfortable with those things, even though they're the things that only I can do. They're very uncomfortable, and so you tend to go back to what you know and what you're comfortable with. So I really appreciate you bringing that up. That's a very important point.
Yeah. All right. Well, number 4 on your list, before I go to number 4, it was interesting you said it's in the middle, manage the business. And when you look at it, it's almost the sandwich effect. You got the 2 heavy that you said are people-oriented on the top 1 and 2, and on the bottom, 4 and 5 about yourself, about other people. It's about the people side of things. This is as well about managed business. There's some delegating, all that stuff. But it's interesting how you put it right in the middle. You probably intentionally did that.
I did.
And I just kind of realized that now. For all the times I've heard you talk about this, I hadn't really put it together just now. It's like, it's interesting that it's sitting right there in the middle between those 2 pivotal parts of, remember what we're talking about here. So we're talking about how do great leaders spend their time.
Right.
And you kind of put it right there in the middle. So I was just thought about that. I had a little aha moment as we were going through this.
And yet sometimes people think it should be first.
Right,
That's what
right.
everyone thinks of as
Right away.
leadership is like, well, I just got to run the business.
Yeah.
Not to be a great leader, you have to do the other things.
Love it. And so many people aren't getting that right. That's why it's the number 1 question that you're getting through the executive circle. So, all right, well, the 4th one is making others successful. So as we move back into this, the people side of the 5 things, most leaders, one of the things we talk about in the 5 levels of leadership is that level 4 is when you begin to develop other people. They look at you as someone that's adding value to them, and you become a people developer. You're reproducing yourself. One of the things that really pains us in all the work that we do around the world is there seems to be a lid at level 3. People understand their job and their role. They understand they got to connect with people. They have to manage the business KPIs, and then it just stops. They don't get this next part of what you're talking about right here, which is, hey, we have to invest in, raise up, and develop and empower other people and make them successful.
Yeah.
John wrote a book called The Leader's Greatest Return. People are like, where's the financials for this greatest return, right? And you're missing the point. It's nothing to do about the financial return. It has to do with exactly what you're talking about here, which is making others successful.
And it is one of John's mantras, and he's taught it for so long.
Yeah.
And he's dead on right, because you're right. Most people hit a ceiling here. And there's been a lot written about how to make others successful, but I think the obvious is put people where they're passionate, put people where they have energy. That is intuitive. I think why so many people fail, though, it's the soft side that is challenging, and we have to have really tough conversations. And with remote work, it makes it even harder, because it's tough to have a tough conversation over the phone.
On a screen or on the phone.
But and these things that I see, first of all, a lack of clarity. People aren't clear what they're supposed to do, and the leader has to make sure there's clarity. Another thing is a lack of trust. If you can feel it and see it, but somehow that leader needs to develop trust. Another one is micromanaging. Like, sometimes we see leaders micromanaging and we don't want to call them out on it, but they're losing good people because they're micromanaging. And I know these are negative things, quote unquote, but this is where I see most leaders fail to have those tough conversations, or somebody doesn't like conflict. And they see conflict between their employees, and they're not addressing that conflict. And so I think to go to that next level, I do think you have to coach people to be successful, but see the problems and have those difficult conversations with them.
I know this question is an entire podcast in itself, but
It really is.
about trust. You said that. I know that most of the leaders, actually all the leaders I've worked with, they're not lying, cheating, and stealing.
No.
So they're not doing the big things. What do you think? And this is what you can make a whole podcast out of this answer, I'm sure. But what are the single thing you see where trust breaks down between a leader and their team when they're not obviously doing anything bad?
Yep.
But what are they doing?
That's a great question, Perry. One thing that pops into mind is when a leader gives an assignment, or he delegates or she delegates, and it's not quite done well. And instead of going back and saying, you really messed this up, here's how I'd like to see it next time, get back on your horse and do it again. Instead of doing that, they divert it to somebody else, or they give the project to somebody else, or they aren't honest and they don't confront conflict. Really, and then that person loses trust immediately for the leader. And I see that over and over again. That's when I said not managing conflict. having that difficult conversation is so important. So that's what comes to mind.
Love that. Number 5, this is going to be huge. Keep yourself healthy. Boy, I love that you have that in there, but please tell me more.
Well, it didn't used to be in there for me. I had this 4-part model for a long time. I added it because my biggest failures in life, both personally and professionally, have come because I didn't keep myself healthy.
Wow.
And if I can do anything to stop someone else from going through what I went through, whether it's at the turnaround at SeaWorld, I was working 20 hours a day, 7 days a week. I hate to admit, but there was a part of my career where drinking was an issue because I was so stressed, and I just needed an out. And I'm not proud of that, but I sought help. And people who read my book know this. I actually lost my first marriage, which is the biggest. I can hardly talk about it. It's the biggest failure of my life, and I hate divorce. I hate that it happened, but it was because I didn't stay healthy. I didn't watch out for the red flags. And so, my big advice to people is, get rest, look for the red flags, and if you're too stressed and you go to bad behavior, whatever that dysfunctional behavior is, get help. Get help now before it's too late. And we as leaders, even just getting rest, a great leader has to be rested. An unrested leader will not be a great leader. So even if it's just getting that, which is much lighter, it's still very, very important.
Yeah, I appreciate the transparency and the heart behind that.
Yes.
And, it makes me think about this last one that you added. Now that you're on the other side of this intense leadership journey, you're still leading in many different ways, but you're calling out saying, hey, I got to lead myself first. And
Right.
and John has always taught us we're the hardest person to lead, right? Like I got all kinds of excuses and things. And I think, man, if you are listening to this podcast and you go, man, that's me. This guy right here has a heart to serve and add value to you. That's why he's one of our thought leaders. He has our DNA in and through him and leading at the highest level. And so that last message was worth the entire podcast for me. And so I hope it was for you as well. The 5 things real quick, I'll just kind of recap as I wrap up today, and I'll let Perry close us, is remember, Perry made a statement that he's heard. What are the things as a leader that only you can be doing for the organization?
Right.
And begin evaluating that. Begin writing that down. And don't be so prideful that the list is 427 things, right? Like, because it's really probably only about 3 or 4 things. And so in these 5 parts, I think as you think through that, you can look at each one of these and what is it in that area. And so Joel shared with us, make sure you're sharing the vision and the strategy with your organization. Or if you're a leader, it's your team, right? And how you tie that to the bigger vision of the company and then down even into the individual roles. Live out the values. Your team sees you. They're watching you all the time. They're aware of that. The organization sees you. Manage the business, make others successful, and keep yourself healthy. Well, today's topic is how leaders move from good to great. And there's a book, about good to great. We're going to talk today a little bit about how do leaders do that? How are you a good leader? Are you a great leader? How do you move the needle to become a great leader? There's so many factors that really distinguish a good leader from a great leader. And some of the research that we've done and Perry's looked at by Jack Zenger and Joe Folkman, some of the factors are improve communication effectiveness, encourage others. We talk about that on here, to grow and to improve, be a role model, be a champion for your team, recognize when change is needed. Otherwise, you'll become irrelevant. And then finally, the last one we have on here is improve your ability to inspire and motivate those that are in your influence.
Lots of good stuff. And Dr. Zenger and Dr. Folkman doing this research, what they did was they took 360-degree feedback data and looked the critical skills of leaders who were progressing most in their leadership, and they pulled these topics out. The one that I thought and it's so key to what we talk about anyway, that I thought we should maybe go a little deep on today, was about communication effectiveness. I think how you communicate really affects your reputation as a leader. And I want to get practical.
I love it.
So we'll talk about some of the concepts, but how do we actually get practical about that? And I'd like you to walk away from this time you invest with other day to 1 or 3 things that you can work on between now and with working with your team. So
That's
is that okay with
excellent.
you?
Yeah, absolutely. Love that. So the first way to increase communication effectiveness is to become a better listener.
Okay, hang on a minute. I just heard with those radios clicking off, and
That's
tape
right.
players
That's right.
that
No
people
one
think-
wants to do that.
I know they all think
it's-
I'm a great listener. What,
Yeah.
are you kidding me?
Yeah.
I'm a fantastic listener.
As my wife says all the time, right? I know you hear me. You're just not listening to me. So I think that there is room for all of us. And what's really key about this is that we often ask a question in some of our training, and we say, we play this would you rather, game in essence. What's more important, to be a better communicator or an effective listener? And then we challenge them. We say, well, whichever one you pick, right? You have to pick this or that. You can't use the other word as you're describing, why you picked the answer that you did. And it's always fun because, especially when you get to this one and you talk about communication, and everybody's right, it's a trick question. They go, well, I can't do that because they're one and the same. Listening is part of communication, and they're spot on, and we do it and we have fun with it. And we talk about how, really there's a 2-way pathway in regards to communication. And that second pathway is to really become a better listener. You can be a great communicator, but if you're not listening to what you need to communicate, then it's not going to be very effective. Or vice versa. You can be a great listener, but if you don't have the ability to communicate. And so I love that we're going to dive into this and really unpack how do we increase our communication effectiveness. And the first one is to become a better listener.
Well, I find that listening is the number one way to show you value someone. You're giving something you can't get back, which is time. To do that, I think when a leader invests time in actively listening to their people, that it demonstrates respect. You begin to understand team members' points of view. You begin to understand how they think. I just think that when you begin to truly appreciate a team member's perspective, you do that through, you can add so much to your own thinking by just listening and asking good questions and listening actively to what your team members are telling you. So most people think they're better listeners than they really are, as we were joking about a minute ago. So I really wanted to get practical about, are there some things, even if you think you're okay listening, do you think you could get better? I know I could. And so what are some of those ideas? And I thought we could bat that about.
I think that when you become intentional about improving your listening skills, it will absolutely increase your connection with people, your influence with people. We joke all the time about our spouses who are our only 2 listeners to the podcast, about how you and I could do a much better job of listening. And I think it's something that if we all slowed down and we remove distractions, we could all get better at. But man, we live in a time and a pace where things are moving faster than they've ever moved before. Social media and devices are everywhere, and it's a problem. I even think about the fact that I have a couple of nephews that are staying with us this week, and we love it. We have fun with them, and so I begin to watch the difference in generations and the influences that are in their life take away from their ability to listen. And so, man, I think this is going to be something as we move forward in organizations that we need to continue to focus on. And so here are a couple of things practically to really look at. We're just talking about electronic devices. Put your phone away when you're having a conversation with somebody. There's nothing worse than having a conversation with somebody and their phone is right there and they keep glancing at their phone and it's buzzing and keep going off. Man, if it's gonna be doing that, that's not a problem. Just try to put that away. Remain in eye contact with the individual. Have that connection with them while you're listening. Give them your complete attention. I'll never forget when I was much younger, someone said the greatest thing that you could do is when you're listening to somebody is for them to think, holy cow, there's a lot of stuff going on right now and it seems like nothing else matters but our conversation, because you're giving them complete attention. And then don't interrupt them. oh man, this is one of the things that just bothers me, is that when I am speaking, or I am watching a conversation and somebody just keeps interrupting a conversation, allow them to finish that. And then finally, take notes from what you're hearing from them. I'll never forget, I was at an event one time, and John was speaking, and so we were there. It was a client of ours, and it's a CEO of a very large company. And John was interviewing this CEO on leadership up on stage, and John was asking the questions and then just feverishly taking notes, listening intently, but taking notes. And so we were on the ride home, to the airport, and I said, John, talk to me a little bit. I haven't seen you do that before. Talk to me a little bit about what was behind you taking notes and during that interview. And he said, oh, I'm working right now on becoming a better listener. I'm looking at becoming better engaged. And when I find myself having to think about what they're saying to be able to take notes, it makes me listen better. And I thought, that's interesting. And so taking notes allows you to do that. The other thing that I think is key here is that, yes, this will help you from a communication standpoint, but all of these things that we have laid out here, they're going to add value to the person that's talking to you. Mm-hmm. They're gonna think, man, I'm important. I'm engaged in this conversation. So just some practical ways to do that to improve your listening.
I listened to you talk about, put my phone away, but you also need to master your wrist. I am so tired of people.
Oh, that's so good.
While I'm talking to someone, they look at their watch, but they're not checking the time, although they may be, which sends me a very bad message.
Yeah,
but
it may be worse.
Yeah. I don't have to pull out my phone. I can just look at my wrist because that's where all my. Oh no, don't do that. And I was also the skill of curiosity is one that many leaders need to work on. Is that when someone's talking to me, can I become curious about I'm curious. What is the point they're trying to make? I'm curious. Well, how does this apply to what we're talking about? I'm curious. And it just makes me a little bit deeper in my thinking and listening. And then also, I got some coaching on this I'm trying to formulate, instead of my response to what you're saying, I'm trying to formulate what's the best question I can ask when you're done. And thought, before I give my response, I need to ask one question. It could be a follow-up, it could be something, but I also like little phrases that help me. I use, tell me more. What happened next? And then what did you do? And most people are just floored that you would encourage them to keep talking, because they're used to people waiting for them to take a breath so they could jump in and talk. And instead I said, well, tell me more. What happened next?
I also hear you say quite a bit lately, which I love, which is I have a point of view on that. What's your point of view?
I love that.
Right? And I love that. I love how you position that so that you can continue to listen more what they're doing.
Another way, improving communication effectiveness and raise your leadership influence, become intentional about your nonverbals, like body language, facial expression, tone of voice, all the ways that people are reading you as they're communicating. We talk about you're always making people feel something. What is it you make people feel? So when someone's talking to you, or when you're talking to someone, let's keep it on listening. Someone's talking to you. What are you doing with your face? What are you doing with your body language? Are you facing them? Are you facing the door? Are you rolling your eyes? Are you get your hands on your hips? There's positives and negatives about all that, but I think it really affects so much about how people feel. Are they being heard, or are you just tolerating and waiting for your time to speak?
Yeah, this is so good for me personally, just to even go through this, because I'll get lazy at times listening, and I know this, but maybe my actions don't necessarily show that. And so again, we're in the leadership space. This is what we do every day. We're in the communication space, and yet you're challenging me with some of the things that we're talking about here today. And so as you're listening to this podcast, I hope that you're being challenged as well to become a better listener. One other thing in regards to this is, do you have empathetic communication style?
Mm-hmm.
You guys know what I'm talking about. There are those that do and those that don't when it comes across that way. And empathy in your communication means that you have the ability and you can relate to the individual, and maybe not exactly what they're going through, right? But you can get into that place with them, and you can be empathetic during a conversation. And when you do this, it no doubt increases your ability to connect with people, and then will increase your influence as a leader. When you were just talking about mind your face, I love it when you say that, right? Like what is that face telling people? Yeah. I was having this conversation just recently, within the last week, with a leader, and we were talking about, as conversations happen, the facial expressions will change. And somebody said to this individual, like, what's going on with the face? Like, and he said back to, we've worked together for how long? Like, this is just, and so they kind of started laughing about it. And then he said, oh, let me tell you another funny story about kind of the mind your face as you're talking about this and listening. He said that some of his team want the masks to be a policy of what they have to wear while they're working, because it covers his face and they don't have to look at his facial expressions while he's listening or communicating to the team. That's the power of what you're talking about here in connecting through communication. And whether you have empathy or not is mind your face. Do you smile? Do you welcome people? Are you approachable or are you not?
Yeah, empathy versus sympathy.
Yeah. Oh,
can I feel for you or do I feel sorry for you? That people can tell if you're relating to them. Another great way to improve your communication effectiveness was to master this skill. I call it a skill of providing regular feedback to those you work with. And when you provide constructive feedback, you communicate that you care about me, that you want to see me grow and improve. And I think, unfortunately, many leaders shy away from this because they fear the conflict it might cause. They don't want to give bad news. I don't know I've heard many reasons for this, but done correctly, I believe that feedback can be your friend, is a great way to really find the greatness in other people. And so when you say my communication style, if you expect that when you're with me and we're performing in our role, that I'm going to give you feedback and that I expect feedback from you, do you think that raises my reputation as a leader? I think so. I think people turn to expect, say, Perry, what'd you think? And that's when I'll use, well, I have a point of view, but what did you think? Because I want to hear what they think first, but get practical on that one.
I love that. So let's talk about this feedback. We've all heard of the feedback sandwich, right? Like, and the reason that we really do it, and this is so good, is that we really do that because it makes us feel better about giving the feedback.
That's what I've learned, yes.
They know what you're doing, by the way, right? Yeah. And so they probably have their guard up even more and they're not even listening.
And explain the feedback sandwich.
So where you end up giving somebody something positive, then some constructive feedback, and then you close with a positive comment.
And we can get out as quickly as possible.
And then you get out as quickly as possible.
Now I feel better about myself.
Yeah, that's right. And so, man, I gave him 2 positive things, 1 negative. And so to your point here is that, man, yeah, absolutely. I think that is more for you than them. So I've heard you teach and talk about getting away from the feedback sandwich and talking more about a feedback conversation.
That's right.
And the feedback conversation goes like this. As close to an event that you've witnessed as possible as a leader, share something that you thought the person did well, then share something you think they might have done better, and then ask the question, what you were talking about a minute ago, which is, what did you think about that? Mm-hmm. So you're creating this dialogue versus giving statements on that sandwich, and you're inviting them to have a conversation. And that is a much different approach to a topic than just having the feedback sandwich.
It's worked amazing for me is that, hey, that sales call, I thought you did a great job on engaging the client, the prospect in a conversation. One area I thought you could have improved on with how you presented our value proposition. What do you think? And the salesman looks right at me and says, no, I thought it was great. What, are you kidding me? I go, well, I thought some confusion on the customer's face and I was just observing, but maybe I'm wrong. How did you see it? And he goes, well, now that you mention it, I did get a little tangled up and I was very vague on a couple of things and I really wasn't sure how to. I said, well, tell me, how can we have done it differently? And now we're in a beautiful place. I'm having a great conversation. And the salesman, what salesman ever did this? Is hey, would you do a role play with me on that? Nobody ever asked for a role play. Yeah. I thought, yeah, let's role play that for a moment. How could give me the value prop to do that? So another area I think can improve your reputation as a leader and increase your influence and increase your communication is, and we talk about it a lot here, but I think it really applies, is those 3 questions that every follower, every person you're listening to is asking about you while you're leading, while you're influencing them. Do you remember the 3 questions?
No.
Okay.
I'm not listening.
You do.
I'm just kidding. Yeah, absolutely. So what they want to know is, hey, are you going to help them? Do you care about them?
Yep.
And can they trust you?
Yeah, love these.
And this is a staple of John and really when he talks about leadership and connecting with people. And so these are a great way to frame your question. Now, what we want you to know is, man, if you can answer yes, or these questions are being answered yes about your leadership, then your communication is in a pretty good place, and you have the ability to increase your influence and your reputation as a leader. The getting practical behind this and why we put this in here is, if the answer to any of those 3 questions is no, then dig into that. Why is it no? Why is it that it is no? What can you be doing or working on to move that from a no to a yes? They're simple questions, and it's a simple answer, yes or no. If it's yes, hey, keep trudging, keep getting better. But if it's no, we really want you to kind of unpack and look into that.
Yeah, fantastic. And then finally, I just thought that, John's new book out on the 16 undeniable laws of communication, I was really taken by a truth in one of the laws there. It was that the law of credibility, that, great communicator knows that you're not the main attraction. It's all your communication is about others. And if you make it about yourself, if you're talking in a way that makes it about you, you're not making it meaningful for others. So I thought for me that was a great reminder, is that in my communication, is it about others? Am I talking to others? Am I listening with respect to others? Lots of things that make up a great communicator, but being credible in your communication by the life you live and the way that you present yourself, and then you make it about others, goes a long way.
Goes a long way. Well, as we wrap up, remember, we started this by talking about how leaders move from good leadership to great leadership. And I love that you said, hey, let's just take one and let's get really practical. What's interesting is that one, when we work with organizations, we go through a discovery process, and no doubt about it, in the top 3 every time, and you know this, you've been on a lot of discovery calls, is, man, listen, we got to get better at communication as leaders. We have leaders that don't do a good job of communicating. As an organization, we don't do a good job of communicating. So here were just a couple of very practical, simple ways. Go back, listen, have a little bit of an assessment, check yourself on these areas that we brought to you. And I promise you, if you work on becoming a more effective communicator by some of the tips that we gave you, you will go from being a good leader to a great leader.
Welcome to the Maxwell Leadership Executive Podcast, where our goal is to help you increase your reputation as a leader, increase your ability to influence others, and increase your ability to fully engage your team to deliver remarkable results.